Welcome back, everybody. We're back in the book of Psalms. We're going to cover three more chapters today, 25, 26, and 27. Let's talk about real life for a second. Not a polished version of life, but a version where things are messy, where things are chaotic. Seasons where you're trying to follow God, but you still feel unsure. You still feel that overwhelming sort of anxiety. Maybe you're just mentally exhausted. These three chapters meet you right in those type of places because David is not writing from a place of comfort. He's not chilling at the beach getting his suntan on. David is dealing with very real pressure. He's dealing with regret. He's dealing with enemies that are surrounding him. And he's dealing with uncertainty about the future. Yet, running through all three of these Psalms, there's a steady theme that David sort of gives to us. Trust in God. Not perfect faith, not having it all figured out or having your life all together, but consistently returning to God through it all. Psalm 25 opens with David saying this in verses 1 and 2. O Lord, I give my life to you. I trust in you, my God. Do not let me be disgraced or let my enemies rejoice in my defeat. So that phrase, I give my life to you, or I lift up my soul, as it says in some versions, it carries this idea of complete dependence on God, placing our entire self into God's hands. Our will, our emotions, our decisions, our future. This isn't just a casual, God, can you help me out type of a prayer. This is full surrender that David is showing us here. And if I'm really honest with myself, sometimes I struggle with this idea of full surrender because I want God's direction, I want God's guidance, but I don't want to fully surrender things over to Him. I want Him to guide my life in the way that it should go, but I still want to be the one behind the steering wheel. Then in verses 4 and 5 it says this: Show me the right path, O Lord. Point out the road for me to follow. Lead me by your truth and teach me, for you are the God who saves me. All day long I put my hope in you. So the word teach here is significant. David is not asking for quick answers or a quick fix to his situation. He's asking God to form him, to shape his heart. And there's a big difference between God giving you an answer and God shaping you into the kind of person who can walk wisely. Sometimes we might feel frustrated because God is not giving us the clarity that we want fast enough, but God is more focused on building our character through our circumstances. Then David gets brutally honest with himself. In verse 7, he says, Do not remember the rebellious sins of my youth. Remember me in the light of your unfailing love, for you are merciful, O Lord. Do not remember the rebellious sins of my youth. In other words, God, I know my past. I know I've done things that I've messed up. I know I've made mistakes, but please deal with me based on your unfailing love and your mercy, not my mistakes. And that's such a real moment because a lot of us don't struggle with remembering our sin. We struggle with believing God can move beyond our sin and show us mercy anyways. David leans into God's character instead of his own history, and I think that's an important lesson for us. Verse 9 says, He leads the humble in doing right, teaching them his way. He leads the humble in doing right. This is big stuff right here because guidance is not just knowing what to do. It's about being humble enough to follow what God is telling you to do. You can be intelligent, you can be extremely informed, but you can still feel completely stuck spiritually if you're not open to correction. Humility is what keeps you teachable. It's the difference between asking for directions and actually being willing to change course. And then toward the end of chapter 25 in verses 16 and 17 it says, Turn to me and have mercy, for I am alone and in deep distress. My problems go from bad to worse. Oh, save me from them all. I am alone and in deep distress. I feel like that really resonates because David is not pretending that everything around him is fine. He's honest about the loneliness that he's feeling. He's honest about the anxiety that he's dealing with. And yet he's still talking to God. And that's what trust looks like sometimes. Not feeling strong, but refusing to disconnect from the source. So Psalm 25 is really about learning to trust God's direction even when life feels unclear. And we all know that it often does. And leaning into that surrender is not a loss of control, it's the beginning of clarity for us. Then Psalm 26, it kind of shifts from God guide me to God examine me. David says in verse 1, Declare me innocent, O Lord, for I have acted with integrity. I have trusted in the Lord without wavering. And that sounds bold at first, but he is not claiming perfection here. He's talking about direction. He's pointed his life towards God, and he's just calling that out. He's not saying that he never messes up. He's not saying that he never fails. He's saying that he's not living a divided life. Then in verse 2 it says, Put me on trial, Lord, and cross-examine me. Test my motives and my heart. Now, that sounds like an incredibly spiritual prayer, but when you actually think about it, it's a little bit crazy to be asking God to cross examine you because if God were really to examine our motives, He's going to get past our actions and He's going to get down into our reasons. Why do you do what you do? What do you really want? What are you holding on to? I think if we're honest, most of us are comfortable asking God to fix the things around us, but maybe a fewer amount of us are actually comfortable asking God to expose the things within us that we have tried to keep hidden. Then, verse 3 says, "For I am always aware of your unfailing love, and I have lived according to your truth." And this is where everything connects. David's integrity isn't about discipline, it's rooted in awareness. He lives differently because he knows that he is loved by God. And what really sinks in for me is that obedience stops feeling like pressure and it starts becoming a response. Sometimes when you hear the word obedience, you think, ugh, that sounds terrible, but it is the appropriate response because we are loved. Then David talks about not surrounding himself with deceitful people in verses 4 and 5. And this is incredibly practical for us because your environment shapes you much more than you think. You don't drift into godliness, you drift away from it. So if you're serious about walking with God, you have to be intentional about what it is that's influencing you. That includes the people that you hang out with, that includes the content that you're watching on TV or on social media or whatever. What voices are you feeding your mind with? It's like trying to stay dry while you're standing in the rain without an umbrella. At some point, the environment is going to win unless you make some adjustments. Then in verse 8 it says, "I love your sanctuary, Lord, the place where your glorious I love your sanctuary, Lord, the place where your glorious presence dwells." That's such an important shift. David doesn't just avoid sin, he actually enjoys God. He desires God's presence, and that's where faith becomes more than just rules, it becomes a relationship. Psalm 26 is really about alignment, not perfection, but a life that's moving in the same direction as God and in His will. Then we move into Psalm 27, when this is where things kind of come together emotionally. David starts strong in verse 1, where he says, "The Lord is my light and my salvation, so why should I be afraid? The Lord is my fortress, protecting me from danger, so why should I tremble?" The Lord is my light. Light here is not just poetic language, it's everything that darkness lacks: clarity, direction, hope. David is saying that God doesn't just rescue me, he helps me see. And that's important. Then in verse 3 it says, "Though a mighty army surrounds me, my heart will not be afraid. Even if I am attacked, I will remain confident." Even with enemies around him, David says he won't be afraid, and that is not denial, that is perspective. He's acknowledging what is happening, but he's anchoring himself in who God is. Then you hit verse 4, and this is really the center of it all. "The one thing I ask of the Lord, the one thing I seek most, is to live in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, delighting in the Lord's perfections and meditating in his temple." The one thing that I ask. This is not a list that David has made, not priorities competing with each other, just one clear desire on his part, and that is to be with God. And man, that's challenging for me. Because if I'm honest, I tend to treat God like an important part of my life instead of the foundation that my life is built upon. We want God to help us build our lives, while David is saying, "God, you are my life." Then in verse 7 it says, "Hear me as I pray, O Lord, be merciful and answer me." Hear me as I pray. Suddenly it sounds less confident and more desperate. And that's important because it shows that real faith includes both. You can declare trust in God, but still cry out for help. You can feel strong in one moment and overwhelmed in the next, but still be walking with God in both of those situations. Then, verse 10 says, "Even if my father and mother abandon me, the Lord will hold me close." Now, that is deep security right there. Even the most stable human relationships can fail, but God never fails. His presence is not conditional or temporary, He never fails. And then chapter 27 closes with verses 13 and 14, where it says, "Yet I am confident I will see the Lord's goodness while I am here in the land of the living. Wait patiently for the Lord. Be brave and courageous. Yes, wait patiently for the Lord." Waiting is where things get real for most of us. We don't mind trusting in God when things feel like they're progressing or feels like they're moving forward, but we struggle with the waiting part. We struggle when we feel like things are at a standstill. But waiting in this sense is not passive. It's not just sitting around doing nothing. It's active trust in God. It's choosing to believe that God is working even when you can't see it yet. It's staying steady when everything in you wants to rush ahead or give up. And it's like being in the middle of a good story, a good book. You don't walk out just because the tension hasn't been resolved yet. You trust that there's still an ending coming. So when you kind of zoom out and you look at these three Psalms together, there's a clear movement going on here. Psalm 25 is about trusting God with your direction. Psalm 26 is about aligning your life with Him and His will. And then Psalm 27 is about desiring His presence above everything else. Trust Him, walk with Him, want Him. That's the rhythm. Jesus says in Matthew 11:28, "Come to me, all who are weary, and I will give you rest." Don't wait till you try to fix yourself before coming to God. Don't wait till you feel like you got everything figured out. Right now is the time to trust God, and He will cover those things with His unfailing love and His mercy. That's where it all starts, is with that small decision. Won't He do it?